1950s and 1960s, after the Second World War, northern and western African villages would traditionally send their most strong and most courageous men to France to work there. They would stay there for, give it or take, 20 years and send most of their monthly salary back to home, where they can support the family in the motherland. In the 1960s, the French economy was really booming, especially the mechanics, car, and other industries where cheap labor was necessary. Until the 1980s. In the 1980s, the recession kicked in, and most of these cheap labor forces were laid off because of the fact they were not French, and thus creating major social and economic struggles for their offspring, which are now called the beur. The word beur is a word from the French slang, which actually means Arab, but is recited reversely. The beur are the offspring of North African immigrants, and they are multinational in identity. They can be found all over Europe, but every beur in every country in Europe has a different background story, but they are categories. In France, we can find two categories: a social economic category, which are the children of cheap labor forces who went to France to find work and success there, and a social political category, which are called the Hakis, which are the offspring of Algerians who sided with the colonial administration during the Algerian Revolution. The Beur are everyday victims of racism, especially when they try to get a job and when they can afford it to try to get a rental apartment. This is not especially a problem of France, and this doesn't say that France is a racist country. This is a problem all over post-colonial Europe. The first group of Beur are a social economic group. They are the children and offspring of cheap labor forces who went to France to support for the families at home. Because of their parents had a low-skilled job and no education, it gave them limited mobility in French society, and also giving their offspring a social labor status, which also limited their access to the wealth of the French society. But there are also success stories. These are called the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie are a group of Beur that are economically doing well and provided their own success in the harsh conditions that they lived. Because they created their own success, they are a major example and role model economically, socially and culturally for the Beur that are still struggling in the bad neighborhoods of France, like the Cité in Paris. They are also the reason for the booming halal business in Europe and France, which is growing with 10% every day. This because of the fact they wanted something new, something fresh, and not the same as their parents had. The second category of Beur can be defined as the Hakis. The Hakis are also North African immigrants, but unlike the social economic status that the children of the labor immigrants had, the Hakis had a more social political status. This because of the fact that they are the children of the Algerians who sided with the French colonial administration during the Algerian Revolution. This makes the situation far more complex. They bear the scars of their parents and of their past, and are rejected in both France and Algeria. They are rejected in Algeria because they are seen as traitors. They didn't stand with their own folk, but chose for the colonial administration. But in France, they aren't seen as French people because they are still Algerian and only colonial people. In the eyes of the French, their parents made a mistake, but also in most of the children's eyes of Turkeys, their parents made a great mistake. This makes it far more complex for the Hakis to integrate in the French society because they are just rejected. The problem that the beur poses to French society isn't just the problem of the beur, it's the problem of how the French society looks at the nation building of its own nation. There are two perspectives on this nation building idea. The first is a national Catholic perspective. The national Catholic perspective sees France as a biological and organic unity in the form of language, ethnicity, and religion. The labor immigrants were welcome as guests, but eventually had to leave. At second, there is the Republican view. The Republican welcomed the immigrants, but as an individual, not as a group. The Republican view looks from an enlightened perspective and an enlightened philosophy. The state is more a social contract than a unity of ethnicity, religion, and language. They expect that immigrants integrate through the French institutions, and this is necessary to create this social contract. You can see that this is a major problem for the beur who came to France and the immigrants who came to France and their offspring. At first, in the national Catholic view, they weren't Catholic, so they were Muslim, so it was very hard to integrate in that way, and they created their own groups and their own sections, and so weren't welcome in this perspective. For Christian and European immigrants, this was far more easy, because they usually were Catholic or were already known with the culture that is European. The Republican view is a little less harsh on the immigrants, but also they want to integrate these immigrants through the French institutions. But because there are Muslims, it is very hard to go through the French institutions, which are mostly Catholic. So this expected integration was very hard to live by for the beur, and this changed when Sarkozy made the first French Council of Muslim Religion, and so giving the Muslims a face in the French institutions. Still, it was very hard for the beur to integrate because of their parents. They didn't speak the language very well, and their parents also didn't see education as a necessary thing to do in the society. But it was very hard for the French government to create special schools for these immigrants or institutions in that kind of sort, because the First Amendment of the French Constitution states that everybody is equal. So you can't give immigrants a special treatment, because then they are not equal. In the 1960s, the French government developed huge public housing programs, and thus created the bad neighborhoods where the beur are growing up now. Most of these neighborhoods, like the Cité, have an unemployment rate of 20% or more. And sadly, this is the place where most of the beur grow up. The opportunities are scarce, and going back is not an option, because of the fact that the home country was war-torn, or it was just as poor as the neighborhoods they were living in. And the Hockeys, for example, weren't even welcome back in the motherland because they were seen as traitors. The beur always have lived between two identities, and it made it very harsh. So most of them see themselves partly European, but also North African and also French, or the national country where they're living in. To conclude this, they also hold on to their heritage, and they can create a complete new identity. This makes beurs so special. Thank you.